Look at this building. I am going to show you a figure that will destroy everything you thought you knew about history. 847 rooms, corridors totaling 5 kilometers in length, a plumbing system designed for 50,000 people per day, an electrical network for 900 lamps, an internal telephone exchange with 100 lines. And now for the main part. All of this was built in 1896 for a town with a population of 4,000 people. 4,000. Someone built the infrastructure for a city of 1 million people in a place where only a few wooden houses stood in just 18 months, using local workers without modern machinery. Either we are being lied to about who built it, when it was built, or why. Today, I will show you documents, photographs, and facts that prove this building should not have existed in 1896. Let's start with a simple question. Have you ever built a house? If so, you know that even a small family cottage requires months of planning, dozens of workers, and mountains of materials. Now multiply that by 847 rooms. Add a dome as high as a 15-story building. Add kilometers of marble corridors, carved staircases, stained glass, and communication systems. And now imagine that all of this had to be built in a year and a half in a small town of 4,000 people, in a town where the nearest railroad is 50 kilometers away, where there is no power plant, where there is no running water. This is the Allegheny County Courthouse in Pittsburgh. According to the official version, it is a masterpiece of late 19th century American architecture, built by architect Henry Richardson. But let's look at the numbers that official historians prefer not to discuss. Let's start with the most obvious, water supply. Inside the building, a plumbing system was installed with a capacity of 50,000 people per day. 50,000. In a town where at the time of construction only 4,000 people lived. That is 12.5 times more than what was needed for the entire population of the town, let alone a single building. Imagine you're building a house for a family of 4 and installing a water system for 50 people. Absurd, right? Now multiply that absurdity by 12.5. Someone knew crowds would be coming here. But that's only the beginning. 847 rooms. 847. For comparison, the average courthouse had 20 to 40 rooms. This one has more than 20 times that. The corridors have a total length of 5 kilometers. It's like walking from one end of a small town to the other without leaving the building. What for? Why does a town of 4,000 people need an administrative complex the size of a small city block? Now look at these photographs from the 1890s. In them, you see this same building surrounded by wooden shacks, literally. Around this monumental palace with marble columns stand crooked barns and one-story huts. It's as if someone built Versailles in the middle of the slums. Economically, this is impossible. A town cannot afford such a building. It's as if a village in Siberia with 100 people built itself a Kremlin with golden domes. Where did the money come from? Where were the workers? Where were the materials? The official construction budget was $4 million. In today's money, that is approximately $130 million. For a town with a population of 4,000, this means every resident, including infants, would have had to pay $32,500 in today's currency. Would you agree to give $32,000 to build a courthouse? Would you agree to have your family of 4 give $130,000? Of course not. No one would. But the building stands. And this is where it gets interesting. I pulled up archival funding documents. Do you know what I found? Most of the funds came from private foundations and charitable organizations whose names have either been erased by time or never existed. I checked. These organizations left no trace in any other project of that era. They appeared, funded the most expensive building in the state, and vanished. It's as if someone really wanted this building to be constructed but didn't want us to know exactly who was behind it. Now let's talk about the strangest detail, the layout. I gained access to the original blueprints from the 1890s. They indicate not only what was built, but also what was planned for connection. In the building's basements, there are exits for underground tunnels. 4 exits, 4 directions. The documents say, for future connection to the city's underground transport system. What transport system? In 1896, this town didn't even have a streetcar. The subway would only appear in America 8 years later and only in New York. But someone in 1896 was building a structure with an underground metro in mind that didn't exist.
They weren't building for their own time. They were building for a future they already knew about. And if you think this is the only building like this, you are wrong. I spent the last 3 months researching, and what I found shocked me to my core. There are dozens of such buildings all across America, all built in the 1890s, all with infrastructure for a population 10 to 20 times larger than the real one, all with the same architecture. Next week, I will release a video showing you a map of these buildings. What you see will make you reconsider the entire history of the development of America, because these buildings are not located randomly. They form a network. What I will show in the next video explains why these buildings were built exactly where they stand, and it has nothing to do with courts or the government. It has to do with energy. But before we move on to that, I need to show you something that will make you doubt everything you knew about 19th century technology. Because inside this building there are systems that should not exist in 1896. Physically, they should not. Let's remember what existed that year. The Wright brothers hadn't invented the airplane yet. That wouldn't happen for another 7 years. Henry Ford hadn't created the assembly line. That was 17 years away. Most houses were lit by gas lamps or candles. Only the rich had telephones. Radio hadn't been invented yet. Now, step inside this building. 900 electric lamps. 900! Each one connected to a central power station located in the basement, automatic circuit breakers, distribution boards, a backup power system in case the main grid failed. Do you realize how far ahead of its time this is? In 1896, electricity was a luxury. Thomas Edison had only just begun the electrification of New York, and even then only in the central districts. Most American cities had no power plants at all. Yet here is a building with 900 lamps, an automatic lighting control system, and backup generators. But let's dig deeper. I spoke with an electrical engineer who specializes in historic buildings. I showed him the electrical diagrams of this building. Do you know what he said? This is a 1920s diagram, at the very least. Some of these solutions I've only seen in buildings from the 1940s.
The system has zonal load distribution. This means the building is divided into electrical segments, each of which can operate independently. If a short circuit occurs in one zone, the others keep working. This technology was invented in the 1920s for the first skyscrapers. But the diagram is dated 1894, 26 years before this technology was invented. An error? Forged documents? Or did someone have access to knowledge that shouldn't have existed? Moving on. The ventilation system. In 1896, ventilation in buildings worked simply. You opened a window to air out the room. That's it. No systems. But in this building, there is a central forced air ventilation system with mechanical air circulation. Air is drawn from the outside, passes through a filtration system. Yes, filters in 1896, is heated or cooled depending on the season, and is supplied to every room through air ducts. Each of the 847 rooms has adjustable ventilation in 1896. The first central air conditioning system was invented by Willis Carrier in 1902, 6 years after this building was completed. But it's already here, in a more primitive form, but the principle is the same. And now hold on tight because it gets even more interesting. The heating system. A central boiler in the basement. Pipes run from it throughout the entire building, not just pipes, but a system with valves and temperature regulators. In every room, you can individually adjust the temperature. Individual temperature control in 847 rooms in 1896. I contacted a heating system historian. Yes, they exist. He told me that such systems only began to be mass installed in the 1930s and only in the most expensive buildings. But here, it was done in 1896. Furthermore, the system has automatic adjustment. There are mechanical thermostats, devices that automatically maintain a set temperature. The first automatic thermostat was patented in 1883, but those were primitive devices for home use. Here, we have an industrial system with dozens of thermostats controlling a giant building. Someone installed 1930s technology in an 1896 building. But that's still not all. An internal telephone exchange for 100 lines.
Alexander Graham Bell invented the telephone in 1876. 20 years later, this technology was still extremely rare. A telephone cost a fortune. Most people had never even seen one in person. But in this building, there is a 100-line switchboard, 100 telephones, an internal communication system allowing any employee to contact another with the push of a button. The first office PBX systems appeared in the 1910s. This one was installed in 1896, 14 years before such systems even appeared on the market. And hydraulic elevators. 4 hydraulic-powered elevators, each capable of lifting 15 people, a safety system with automatic brakes, call buttons on every floor. Elisha Otis invented the safety elevator in 1853, but those were primitive manual designs. Automatic elevators with buttons didn't appear until the 1900s, but here in 1896. Every system in this building is 10 to 40 years ahead of its time, every single one. This cannot be a coincidence. It cannot be the genius of the architect. A genius might think 5 years ahead, but 40 years, using technologies that haven't even been invented yet? And this is where I stumbled upon the strangest thing, because this building is not unique. I found 47 more buildings across America built during the same years, with the same systems, with the same architecture. It's as if someone was stamping them out using a single plan. And when you see their photos side by side, you will have no doubt. These are not separate projects. This is a single program. But whose? Place the photos of the courthouses in Philadelphia, Chicago, Detroit, St. Louis, and Pittsburgh, all built in the 1890s, next to each other. What do you see? The same dome, the same proportions, the same columns, the same towers, the same arches. Even the number of windows on the facade matches with 90% accuracy. These are not similar buildings. These are twin buildings. The official version claims different architects in different cities independently created projects following the fashion of the time for the Romanesque style, a random coincidence of tastes. But let's look at the facts. Pittsburgh Courthouse, built 1883 to 1996, architect Henry Richardson. Chicago Courthouse, 1885 to 1897, architect also named Richardson. Detroit Courthouse, 1890 to 1896, architect unknown, documents lost. Philadelphia Courthouse, 1871 to 1901, architect John MacArthur. Look at the dates. All these giant buildings were being built simultaneously in different cities, separated by hundreds of kilometers, in an era when there were no telephones for coordination, no cars for fast travel, and no computers to share blueprints. How did they manage to build practically identical buildings at the same time on different ends of the country? I found something that official historians don't like to discuss. Original blueprints of some of these buildings are preserved in the archives of the Library of Congress. And here's what's interesting. The paper they are drawn on was manufactured at the same factory. I checked the watermarks. All the blueprints are from the same factory. All are done with the same type of ink. All have the same notation system. It's as if someone sat in one place and drew the plans for buildings across the country. Then these plans were sent to different cities where local contractors carried them out. But who? What organization in the 1890s had the power and resources to coordinate the construction of dozens of giant buildings across the nation? The federal government? No. These buildings were built as county courts, meaning they were funded by the states, not Washington. A private corporation? In the 1890s, construction companies of that scale didn't exist. A secret organization? Now that's getting interesting. Because all these buildings have one common element that cannot be explained by functional necessity: the dome. A giant, complex, expensive dome. Why does a courthouse need a dome? For beauty? Then why that specific shape? Why that specific height? Why that specific number of windows arranged in a specific geometric order?
I measured the proportions of these domes and I discovered something shocking. All the domes have a height-to-diameter ratio of approximately 1.618. This is the golden ratio, a mathematical constant found in nature and used in sacred geometry. Coincidence? Maybe, but then explain to me why all the towers have a height that is a multiple of 33 feet. Why is the number of steps in the main staircases always a multiple of 13? Why is an 8-pointed symmetry used in the layout? This isn't an architectural style. This is a code. A geometric code woven into the architecture of these buildings. Once you start seeing it, you notice it everywhere, in the window placement, in room proportions, in the direction of the corridors. Furthermore, if you take a map and mark the locations of all such buildings built in the 1890s, you will see that they form an almost perfect grid covering the entire territory of the USA. The distance between them is roughly the same, about 150 to 200 kilometers. What for? What is the function of this network? And then I remembered the Tartaria theory. According to this theory, until the mid-19th century, a developed civilization existed on the territory of America that possessed advanced technologies. This civilization built giant buildings, used free energy, and had a global communication system. Then a catastrophe occurred, a mud flood that buried the first floors of the buildings and destroyed most of the population and technology. Then the pioneers came and claimed what was left, writing these buildings into a new history. Sounds crazy? Let's look at the facts. In 1890s photographs, traces of excavation are visible around these newly built buildings. Literally, workers are digging the earth around buildings they just built. Why dig around a building you just built? What if you didn't build it but dug it out? In some photos, it's clear that the first floor windows are at ground level or even below, as if the building sank, or as if the ground level rose. And the strangest thing, in old construction photos, often scaffolding is set up next to a building that is already finished. Not construction scaffolding, the building is complete. Decorative scaffolding, for photos, to create the illusion of construction? And then I came across documents that made me reconsider everything. Documents about the mud flood of 1862, about how cities were buried under several meters of clay and mud, about how entire blocks had to be excavated. And guess when the boom of building these structures began? 20 to 30 years after the flood, exactly the time needed to dig out, restore, and repurpose. Look at the newspaper chronicles from that year in cities across America. An unprecedented flood has submerged the central blocks. The city is buried under a layer of mud. The streets have disappeared under flows of silt. Buildings are buried up to their first-floor windows. Dozens of reports from different cities in the same period. Official history calls this a season of heavy rains, but rain is water. It washes things away, but it doesn't bury cities in a meter-deep layer of clay. Now look at photos of these cities taken in the 1870s and 1880s. In many of them, you can see that the first-floor windows are below street level. You can see stairs added to the buildings leading down to basement windows, but the architecture of these windows clearly shows they were intended to be regular first-floor windows. You can see workers digging trenches around buildings, freeing the buried floors. Something buried the cities, something global. I found the diary of an engineer who worked in Chicago in the 1870s. He writes, "Today we discovered another building under a layer of mud. Judging by the architecture, it is much older than previously thought. The authorities ordered the discovery to be classified and not mentioned in reports." Classified, not mentioned. Why, if it's just an old building damaged by a flood, why must it be kept secret? He continues, "Inside the building, we found a system of pipes and wires of unknown purpose. The metal they are made of cannot be identified. One of the workers tried to cut a piece. The saw broke." Wiring in a building that, according to the official version, was built before electricity was invented, made of metal that couldn't be processed by 1870s tools. The diary cuts off. The last entry, "Tomorrow I am called to the Federal Marshal's office. They say it's about the findings. I hope there won't be trouble." There are no more entries. The engineer disappears from all records, as if he never existed. Now let's return to our courthouse in Pittsburgh. Officially, it was built in 1883 to 1896, but I found a map of Pittsburgh from 1860. On it, at the site of the future courthouse, it is marked Old Ruins. Old Ruins in 1860, 23 years before construction began. What ruins? Ruins of what? Official history is silent. But there is an even stranger document. A city engineer's report from 1882, a year before construction started, is preserved in the city archives. The report has a section, Evaluation of the Foundation of the Old Building on the Site for the Future Court. The foundation of the old building, the one they were going to build a year later. In the report, the engineer writes, "The foundation is made of an unknown type of concrete, exceeding in strength any modern materials. Attempts to take samples for analysis were unsuccessful. The material cannot be drilled. I recommend using the existing foundation for the new building." An existing foundation, made of concrete stronger than any modern materials of 1882. They weren't building the structure, they were reconstructing what was already standing. And then I noticed the construction dates of all these twin buildings, 1883 to 1896, 1885 to 1897, 1890 to 1896, 1871 to 1901. Why did all of them take so long to build? 10 to 15 years, in an era when a typical building was built in 2 to 3 years. Official version? Complexity of the projects, lack of funding, technical problems. But here is an alternative version. Because they weren't building them, they were digging them out, cleaning them, restoring them, and modifying them. That truly takes years. Look at the construction photos. In most of them, you don't see construction scaffolding, but lifting mechanisms next to walls that are already standing. You see workers cleaning the facade, not erecting it. You see trenches around the building, trenches for excavation, not for laying a foundation. Furthermore, in some photos, it's clear that different parts of the building are in different states. One part looks freshly restored, while another looks ancient and dilapidated. It's as if the work is being done in stages, digging out and restoring the building step by step. And the most important piece of evidence. I want to show you a document I found in the archives. But first, a question. What do you think about this? You see these photos, these inconsistencies, these oddities. What does your intuition tell you? Write in the comments, do you believe the official version or the catastrophe theory? And most importantly, why? Because I'm about to show you a document that might change your mind once and for all. The document is called the Acceptance Act for the Construction Work of the Allegheny County Courthouse. It is dated 1896, signed by the main contractor. And in it, there is one line that destroys the entire official version. I quote, "The work on the reconstruction and adaptation of existing structures has been completed in accordance with the plan."
Reconstruction of existing structures. They admitted it themselves. They didn't build the building from scratch, they rebuilt it. Let's talk about the people who allegedly built this building. Officially, the project was led by architect Henry Hobson Richardson. The construction was managed by the company Norcross Brothers Construction, and about 300 workers were involved. Sounds reasonable, right? Now let's check the facts. Henry Richardson died in 1886. 10 years before construction was finished. Official version, his students finished the project according to his blueprints. Okay, where are those blueprints? I tried to find them. The original Richardson blueprints for this building have not survived. They all burned in a fire in 1901. Convenient. What did survive? Blueprints from 1889, made after Richardson's death. The signature on them says, based on the design by H. Richardson. But Richardson himself didn't sign them and couldn't have. He was dead. How can we be sure it was his project if the originals are gone and there are only copies made after his death? Moving on. The company Norcross Brothers Construction. I pulled up all available documents about this company, and here is what's interesting. Before this project, the company built ordinary houses and small commercial buildings. The maximum budget for their projects was $50,000. Suddenly, they're entrusted with a $4 million project. That is 80 times more than anything they had done before. It's like a company that builds garages suddenly getting a contract to build a skyscraper. But fine, maybe they were very talented. Maybe they managed. Let's see what happened to the company after the project was finished. 1896. Project completed.
1897, the company declares bankruptcy. 1898, the company is liquidated. They built the most expensive building in the state, supposedly received huge sums for it, and went bankrupt a year later. How is that possible? Here's how. They didn't get that money. Or they got it, but it wasn't real money. Or the entire company was a fiction created on paper to give legal cover to the operation of claiming an already existing building. And now the most interesting part, the workers. 300 people supposedly built this building over 13 years. Do you know how many workers' names are preserved in the documents? 7. 7 names out of 300. Where are the others? Why are there no payroll records? Why are there no lists of injuries or accidents on the construction site? On a project of this scale, accidents were guaranteed. It's just statistics. But there are no records. It's as if these people didn't exist. Furthermore, I found something absolutely insane. In the Pittsburgh Post newspaper from 1888, there is an article about the construction of the courthouse. It mentions that workers are complaining about strange finds inside the building. I quote, "Workers report that in some rooms, metallic structures of unknown purpose have been found embedded in the walls. Attempts to dismantle them have been unsuccessful." Metallic structures inside the walls of a building that is supposedly just being built. Structures that cannot be dismantled. How did they get there if the building is only just being constructed? And then I found the strangest piece of evidence. A photograph, dated 1891. It shows the construction of the courthouse, workers posing in the foreground, but look closely at the building behind them. It doesn't look like it's under construction. It looks like it's being repaired. The facade is clean in some spots and covered in patina and signs of erosion in others. The windows are different. Some are new, some are clearly old, with complex stained glass. You can't install complex stained glass on a construction site. That is the final stage when everything else is ready. But in the photo, the building is clearly still in the middle of work. The only explanation, the stained glass was there originally. The building was already standing. They were just cleaning and repairing it. And there is one more detail in this photo that shocked me. In the bottom left corner, in the shadows, there is a group of men in uniform. Not workers. The uniform is different. Military. With weapons. Why is there armed security at a construction site? What are they guarding? From whom? Or are they guarding a secret, not a construction site? Because when you start studying the architecture of this building from a functional standpoint rather than an aesthetic one, you realize this building isn't for courts. It had another purpose, and that purpose is connected to energy. Forget everything you knew about 19th century architecture. Forget about Romanesque style and neoclassicism. Let's look at this building from the perspective of physics. The dome. Height, 98 meters. Diameter, 60 meters. The ratio is approximately 1.63, almost perfect golden ratio. The golden ratio isn't just a pretty proportion. It's a mathematical constant found everywhere in nature, in the spirals of galaxies, in seashells, in the proportions of the human body. It is the proportion of maximum efficiency. Maximum efficiency for what? For resonance. A dome of this shape is an ideal resonator. It amplifies specific frequencies of sound and electromagnetic waves. This isn't a theory, it's physics. Any acoustician will tell you this. But why does a courthouse need a resonator? Let's dig deeper. The spire at the top of the dome. The spire height is 33 feet. It is made of copper plated with gold. Copper is an excellent conductor. Gold is even better. At the tip of the spire, there is a metal cap with a quartz crystal. Quartz, a piezoelectric material. It generates electric current under mechanical pressure and vibrates when current passes through it. Why is there a quartz crystal on a copper spire on an 1896 courthouse? Official version? Decoration, a symbol of justice. Alternative version, it's an antenna for receiving or transmitting electromagnetic waves. You might say, madness. They didn't know about electromagnetic waves in 1896. That's not true. Heinrich Hertz discovered radio waves in 1887. Nikola Tesla was conducting experiments with wireless energy transmission starting in 1891. The technology existed, but it was classified, suppressed, and forgotten. What if these buildings are the remnants of that technology? Let's go down to the basements. 4 levels of basements, officially for document storage and technical rooms. But look at the layout. The basements form a cross-like structure with a central chamber directly beneath the dome. The chamber is circular, 18 meters in diameter, 12 meters high. 18 and 12, a ratio of 1.5. This is the ratio of an ideal acoustic chamber for amplifying bass frequencies.
The walls of the chamber are lined with granite. Granite contains quartz. Quartz is a piezoelectric. The floor of the chamber is not concrete, but copper. Copper is a conductor. Tunnels run in 4 directions from the chamber, officially for utilities. But the utilities don't run through these tunnels. They run through other, smaller ones. These tunnels are wider and taller. The walls are lined with copper sheets. Each tunnel is oriented strictly toward the cardinal points, north, south, east, west. These aren't utility tunnels. These are waveguides, directional transmitters or receivers of energy. And the most shocking part, I found an electrical grid diagram of the building from 1894. It shows something strange. The central power station in the basement feeds more than just the lights. There is a separate line going to special equipment in the central chamber. Special equipment? What kind? The documents don't specify. But the power is listed, 500 kilowatts. 500. For comparison, the entire lighting of the building consumes 50 kilowatts. Where are those 500 kilowatts going? What is this equipment that consumes 10 times more energy than the rest of the building combined? I contacted a physicist specializing in electromagnetic waves. I showed him the building scheme: dome resonator, spire antenna, underground chamber with copper walls, waveguide tunnels. He was silent for a minute. Then he said, "This is a transmitter, or a receiver, huge, powerful, operating on low frequencies. If this actually functioned, it could transmit energy or signals across hundreds of kilometers." Hundreds of kilometers. Remember the network of these buildings located 150 to 200 kilometers apart? This isn't a network of courts. This is a network of energy hubs. And this is where the frightening part begins. Because if this is true, the question arises, why is all of this hidden? Why are the access to the basements closed? Why are the secret rooms only partially open to tourists? What do they not want us to see? 1. I arrived in Pittsburgh. I wanted to see the courthouse with my own eyes. I asked for permission to tour the basements. Denied. Reason? Technical rooms are closed to the public for safety reasons.
I tried to get permission through official channels. I wrote letters to the county administration. I sent requests under the Freedom of Information Act. Response: the requested information pertains to critical infrastructure and is not subject to disclosure. Critical infrastructure. A courthouse built in 1896 is critical infrastructure? What is down there that is so critically important? But I got lucky. I found a man who worked there as a technician in the 1990s. He agreed to talk on the condition of anonymity. Let's call him John. John told me that in 1994, he was called in to repair electrical work in the basements. He went down to the 4th level, the one where the central chamber is located. The door to the chamber was locked, a massive steel door like in a bank vault. I asked what was in there. I was told, old equipment, hasn't worked for 50 years, don't mess with it. But John is a curious man. When his supervisor stepped away, he peeked through a crack in the door. There was a huge hall, he says. In the center stood a structure. I don't even know what to call it. It looked like a generator, but the size of a truck. Copper covered in coils and wires, and it was humming. Humming? If the equipment hasn't worked for 50 years, how could it be humming? I asked that too. My supervisor turned pale and said, "Forget what you saw. Forget it right now if you don't want trouble." And we left. John isn't the only one. I found 3 more people who worked in the building in different years. Independently of one another, they all tell the same story. There are zones they were forbidden to enter. There are sounds that cannot be explained. There is a feeling that the building is alive. One electrician said, "Sometimes at night when no one is in the building, I heard a hum, low, almost inaudible. It came from below, from the basements, and I felt a vibration. The whole building vibrated slightly in time with that hum." Another security guard, "I saw a glow light up on the spire at night, bluish like a corona discharge on high voltage lines. It lasts seconds and disappears. I asked management. They told me, don't pay attention, it's the weather." The weather? A corona discharge on a copper spire? From the weather? A corona discharge happens at high voltage, tens of thousands of volts. Where do tens of thousands of volts come from on a courthouse spire?
In 2019, the building was partially open to tourists, a special tour called Mysteries of the Old Court. I signed up. I thought I would finally see the basements. But they only took us through the first and second floors. They showed us the grand halls, the library, the old judges' offices. Beautiful, historical, but nothing interesting. I asked the guide, "Can we see the basements?" The guide smiled and said, "Unfortunately, the basements are closed to the public. There are technical rooms and old equipment there that pose a danger." Danger? 1896 equipment that hasn't worked for 100 years is dangerous? But then the guide added something interesting. Although there is one room on the third sublevel that we recently opened for special tours. If you're interested, you can sign up. Special tours. I signed up. 2 weeks of waiting, identity check, signing a non-disclosure agreement to visit a room in a historic building. And there I am, a room about 10 by 10 meters. Walls, brick and copper. Ceiling, a dome with a hole in the center leading somewhere up. In the center of the room, a pedestal. On the pedestal, remnants of some mechanism. Copper coils, glass flasks, strange crystals. The plaque reads, "Experimental Electrical Installation, 1890s." An experimental installation in a courthouse. And now I want to hear your opinion, because I can tell you facts, show you documents, and provide testimony, but everyone must find the truth for themselves. If you are interested in this topic, if you want to know more about the network of these buildings across America, about the Tartarian technologies, and what really happened in the 19th century, keep following these stories. Next week, I will release material about the World's Fairs of the 1990s, 1910s, about how they're connected to these buildings, and why almost all the exhibition pavilions were temporary and demolished immediately after closing. Write in the comments, do you believe the official version of history, or are you starting to doubt it? And most importantly, if you live near a similar building, go there, look at it, take photos. Pay special attention to the basements, the first-floor windows, and signs of excavation. Because the truth is there, in the stone, in the copper, in the architecture of these buildings. So what was it really? Option 1. The genius architects of the 19th century accidentally created a network of buildings with advanced technology, identical architecture, and unexplainable functionality. All of this is a coincidence. Option 2. These buildings were built by a developed civilization that possessed wireless energy transmission technologies. Then a catastrophe occurred, the civilization perished, and the buildings were claimed and rewritten into a new history. Option 3. The buildings were built in the 19th century, but according to blueprints and technologies obtained from an unknown source, perhaps found in ruins, perhaps handed down by someone. Their true function was classified, and the buildings themselves were disguised as ordinary administrative structures. Which option is the truth? I don't know. But I know one thing. The official version does not explain the facts. It doesn't explain the technology. It doesn't explain the scale. It doesn't explain the synchronicity of construction. It doesn't explain why these buildings still hide their basements from the public. And until we are allowed to see what is down there, in those sealed chambers, we can only guess. But maybe the truth isn't in what is there. Maybe the truth is why they are so afraid to show it to us. What do they know?
And why are they silent? This building has stood for over 130 years. It remembers what we have forgotten, or what we were forced to forget. And when you look at its dome, at its spire reaching into the sky, what do you think about? About justice? Or about how once, a long time ago, this antenna was transmitting a signal, and someone, somewhere was receiving it, and maybe they are receiving it even now?